Thank you very much, Commissioner Johansson. And with that, I will now give the floor to the rapporteur of this working group, Tineke Strik, who will have the floor for 1.5 minutes, after which Commissioner Johansson and Mr. Leggeri will have 1.5 minutes each to reply. Then, after that, each political group will have one member intervening for not more than 1 minute to state their questions clearly, either to one or both of our guests today. And depending on who the question is addressed to, Mr. Leggeri will have 1.5 minutes to reply, and or Commissioner Johansson will also have 1.5 minutes to reply before we then go for a second round of questions, during which members will have the chance either to ask their questions or follow up on any questions that they deem was not answered, again clearly indicating who they would like the answers to come from. So with that, Tineke, the floor is yours for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and also thanks a lot to Mr. Leggeri and Mrs. Johansson for their contribution and for being with us. Today is an important day of the Frontex Scrutiny Group. It's the first meeting, the first hearing that we have for this inquiry. And I think that I talk on behalf of the whole group if I say that the main objective of this inquiry is to ensure in the end that border control takes place in full respect for fundamental rights. We are now in the first stage of an inquiry. We will take into account ongoing investigations and all information already available. And indeed, what Mrs. Johansson also said, structural, cultural elements, all elements that may play a role in deficiencies regarding fundamental rights. Nevertheless, we also need to be sure, also need to ensure that we get additional information not yet available, and that we have a smooth and swift access to information, to data that are necessary for our assessment. As Frontex is the key actor, of course, subject to our inquiry, and the Commission has a lot of relevant information to the related to the functioning of Frontex, we really rely on your full and loyal cooperation. And I would therefore ask you if you are committed to fully cooperate with this working group to enable us to get a complete overview of the relevant information. And that means facilitating communication, including meetings with different staff levels, departments within Frontex, and ensuring a swift provision of the documents that this working group will request for. The Frontex regulation also obliges this, but our experience is not always that positive. So I really ask specifically your commitment to that, because we need to finish our inquiry within 4 months, so there's no possibility to delay this sharing of information.
Thank you very much.
Furthermore, are you committed, both of you, to loyally implement the recommendations of our final report? Thank you very much.
Mr. Leggeri, you have the floor for 1.5 minutes to answer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Madam Rapporteur. I can assure you that I'm personally committed to cooperate with the Scrutiny Group, with the European Parliament in general, and with any, let's say, audit or investigative body of the European Union. More specifically, you will be granted access to the documents that you need to carry out your mission, to the staff, and I also offer the possibility for the Scrutiny Group members to visit our headquarters if this can facilitate, and we will see what kind of arrangements we can agree on with Polish authorities because of the pandemic. But basically, and as a principle, I think you should have access to our premises to meet and to have access to documents. When it comes to recommendations, of course, if recommendations are in the nature of improving the work, we are, I'm saying we because as an agency we are growing, and we need some external eyes, so this would be welcome as well.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Johansson, your turn to reply for 1.5 minutes.
Yes, and my answer is yes. I am ready, of course, to cooperate fully with you and also my services. And of course, depending on the regulation when they are for Frontex, then we have 2 seats in the management board that will work for that. If there are recommendations directly to the Commission, then it's because we do not have the possibility to directly instruct the agency, as you know.
Thank you. Next, I'll give the floor to the representatives of the political group. We start with the EPP. Lena Dupont for 1 minute.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks both representatives for their conclusion, for their remarks and presentation. As we all know, the existing legal framework only offers limited options for Frontex for actions in the event of reported and established legal violations. You shortly touched upon it, Mr. Leggeri, the Article 46(4). Considering the weight and the consequences of such decision, would the agency be ready to discuss intermediate measures in the event of established violations? And what could this be as an example? And as you already highlighted a bit, that you are able and that you're willing to present changes or modification as regards the serious incidents report, what is the timetable for that? And the question to the Commissioner would be, not every detected attempt of illegal border crossing can automatically be considered as an asylum case, not even at sea, as we understand that many of the cases handled by the Frontex working group were falling under this category. Are we to expect some legal clarity on such cases by the Commission, given that both the agency itself and the working group of the management board had already asked for it a month ago? Thanks.
Thanks a lot. 1.5 minutes for Mr. Leggeri to reply.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Concerning implementation of Article 46, we certainly need to have some, let's say, standard operating procedure. As I said, the termination of an operation would be, in my views, the last resort. And we have the suspension. I decided a couple of weeks ago to suspend our activities at the land border between Hungary and Serbia because there is a ruling, a decision of the Court of Justice of the European Union. I think we can certainly, and this was the case, reduce the operational footprint when we have some concerns. This is what I did in Hungary since 2017, but perhaps the mistake was that it was not sufficiently communicated about, and this is perhaps where we can improve the standard operating procedures so that everybody knows what is the state of play. Definitely we will, as a recommendation, have to address this. Regarding the serious incident report, the timetable is that now as soon as I get feedback from the members of the working group of the management board and the consultative forum, I can finalize the decision and sign the executive director decision adopting the new standard operating procedure. So basically can be in a couple of days or weeks.
Thank you very much. Next, Commissioner Johansson for 1.5 minutes.
Yes, I will answer the question. First, let me say that it's not the role of the Commission to interpret the laws. It's only the role for the European Court of Justice. They are the only one who can have the right to interpret how we should, the legal aspects here. But we have been, my services have been tasked by the management board and the working group to try to make some clarification on the existing legislation, and my services are preparing that. It's both the obligation to protect illegal entry under the Schengen Borders Code, but it's also the obligation to allow individuals to apply for asylum if they ask for it, and to have a proper process, and to make sure that no person is being returned without respecting the principle of non-refoulement. And this paper is being prepared by my service. But may I underline again, it's not the role of the Commission to interpret the legislation. It's the role of the court.
Okay, thank you very much. We move to the S&D group. Our colleague Bettina Vollat is connected remotely. You have the floor, Bettina.
Danke, Chair. Drei Fragen an Direktor Leggeri. Zum einen, Herr Direktor, können Sie ausschließen, dass Ihre Agentur jemals direkt oder indirekt an Pushbacks oder Grundrechtsverletzungen beteiligt war oder solche beobachtet wurden? Zweitens, In Ungarn wurden die gemeinsamen Operationen ja nun abgebrochen. Warum erst jetzt nach dem EuGH-Urteil? Würden Sie heute wieder gleich handeln? Und zum Dritten, Sie haben 2017 medial ausgesagt, dass Libyens Küstenwache aggressiv und gewalttätig gegenüber NGOs und Flüchtlingen reagiere und sich das ändern müsse. Hat sich das mittlerweile verbessert? Frontex unterstützt ja bei der Ausbildung. Und Frau Kommissarin, Pushbacks sind nach europäischem und internationalem Recht illegal. Nachdem Frontex eine Klarstellung dazu fordert, unter welchen Umständen Pushbacks dennoch zulässig wären, wie sehen Sie das? Gibt es Umstände, unter denen sie erlaubt sein könnten? Und wenn ja, welche? Dankeschön.
Thank you. Mr. Leggeri, 1.5 minutes to reply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the first question, I can say that there is no, and this is clear from the report of the working group, there is no policy to directly or indirectly contribute or carry out violation of fundamental rights. We have a policy of fundamental rights within the agency. We are committed to that. The report will be published and discussed tomorrow, but I don't see any substantiated violation of fundamental rights that would be in this report. On Hungary, I decided after the decision of the Court of Justice to suspend the operations because it was clear for me that by design, because of the decision of the court, it means that by design the risk is that we would contribute to implementation of a national law that doesn't comply with the EU standards. So for me, that was the criteria. We could certainly have a better or more clear standard operating procedure to have a gradual escalation with also the possibility to have a dialogue with the hosting member states. On the training of the Libyan Coast Guard, for the time being there is no training anymore, but this was an EU policy 2 or 3 years ago, and Frontex has never directly cooperated with the Libyan Coast Guard, but we have supported EUBAM Libya, which is a civilian mission of the EU, and we have supported CSDP mission Sophia.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Johansson?
I don't think there were a question to me.
That's true. So I'll turn the floor then to Malik Asmani for the Renew Group.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Johansson and Mr. Leggeri, for your presence. To Mr. Leggeri, can you elaborate perhaps more and give us more insights of the final report for tomorrow, also specific on those investigated cases? You mentioned also the state of play on the recruitment, but could you be more specific also for the Standing Corps for this year? And what could and should the agency have done differently in hindsight in this respect? And are there practical and legal bottlenecks in your view? And to Ms. Johansson, what's your appreciation of those allegations of pushbacks by Frontex? And I'm seeking on your responsibility, because you mentioned also in your introduction, I cannot give instructions, but how do you feel politically your responsibility as Commissioner, and what concrete action did the Commission take besides monitoring and encouraging when the recruitment setback became instrument? Thank you very much.
Mr. Leggeri?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On the reports that will be discussed tomorrow in the Management Board, of course, I cannot elaborate too much, but what I can say is that when I read the conclusions of the last report, the final one, and the preliminary report, I can see that there is no violation of fundamental rights by Frontex. I can see that there is a discussion and there was a legal analysis about interception at sea, and I know that this is something that was perhaps not very well known about the Regulation 656/2014. I think that we will have to look at the legal opinion expressed by the Commission, and I will have as Executive Director to listen also to the Member States who are the ones co-signing the operational plans in the future. But definitely I can say the recommendations will be tabled and they will be implemented, because in a way this working group helped also the management of the agency to confirm some assessments that we had, but maybe this could formalize it in a better way. Regarding the recruitment, there are two types of recruitment. The standing corps, the challenge was first that we had to put in place frameworks, such, for example, the medical checks. They could not be performed in Brussels. This was denied by the medical service. Then the psychological assessment, we had to build it on our own. Then we had the COVID-19 pandemic last year, and the physical aptitude test could not be performed anymore, and the health checks could not be. So we had also to interrupt the training in person, to shift to e-learning, and then to come back to in-person training. So legal bottlenecks, yes, maybe I can say that there were some plans, some MB decisions to be adopted before we could fully roll out the fundamental rights recruitments.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. I have a slightly different view on how this timeline should be or have been compared to the Executive Director. So to answer the question, the Commission's role is, of course, to make sure that the agency have the best possibilities to carry out the tasks, and of course that they are aligned with and fulfill the regulation. And the regulation was adopted 2 years ago, came into force in December 2019, and my services have repeatedly, both in the management board and directly in contact with the executive director and the agency, asked for this to be fulfilled. And there have been a lot of different obstacles put forward for this, or some reluctance to comply with this. In my view, the deputy executive directors, 3, could have been in place, and it should have been in place already. Their recruitment of the new fundamental rights officer could have been done earlier, and the deployment of the 40 fundamental rights monitors that should have been in place early December last year could also have been in place earlier. So my services have been asking for this repeatedly, and this was expressed in a letter sent on the 18th of December last year on my behalf by my Director General, and this letter and the timeline has also been shared with Parliament. Had these recruitments been able to help the agency to better and quicker clarify these alleged pushbacks? Of course, we can't know for 100%, but I guess so.
Thank you very much. Now I pass the floor to Nicolas Bay.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Nous assistons depuis quelques semaines maintenant à une véritable campagne de dénigrement et de déstabilisation de l'agence Frontex, de son action et de son directeur. Malgré quelques précautions oratoires, on voit bien que le fond qui est reproché à Frontex aujourd'hui, c'est d'honorer la mission qui lui a été confiée et le mandat pourtant reçu par l'agence de la part du Parlement et du Conseil, c'est-à-dire assurer la protection des frontières extérieures de l'espace Schengen face à l'afflux de migrants clandestins. Sur 13 cas de refoulement prétendument abusif, l'enquête menée par le Conseil d'administration ne relève aucune anomalie significative. Et l'OLAF a fait savoir que le règlement, je cite, le règlement autorise Frontex à intercepter des embarcations en mer et à donner instruction de changement de cap. À cela s'ajoute la jurisprudence de la CEDH qui valide le principe du refoulement de migrants lorsqu'ils franchissent illégalement les frontières. Monsieur Leggeri, certains voudraient faire de Frontex une agence qui gère et sécurise l'entrée des migrants vers l'Europe. Mais sa mission n'est pas celle-là. Pourriez-vous nous dire quelle est la réalité du travail que vous effectuez avec les autorités grecques, si elles sont satisfaites de leur coopération avec Frontex? Pouvez-vous également nous dire un mot de la jurisprudence concernant Melilla qui décrit de manière précise quels sont les cas de refoulement qui sont parfaitement légaux, parce que certains voudraient installer l'idée du non-refoulement comme un principe et voudraient installer l'idée que tout refoulement serait illégal. Et toute petite question à Madame Johansson, votre collègue, le commissaire Chinas, a assuré Frontex de son soutien complet. Pouvez-vous en faire autant pour dissiper la rumeur persistante selon laquelle vous alimentez ce qui apparaît de plus en plus comme une cabale politique?
Mr. Leggeri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On the reality of our work in Greece, we are implementing the biggest operations we have. So we have usually between 600 and 800 staff, border guards and coast guard officers deployed in Greece. The mission is to contribute to the border surveillance at sea, at land. It's to intercept irregular crossings, to detect, to intercept. When there are cases of search and rescue, then we have to support, because this is the role in the context of the Coast Guard. But of course, we are also a law enforcement actor, and we have to contribute to the fight against criminal activities, including the threat of terrorism. So basically, what we are doing in Greece is border surveillance, border checks, security screening, debriefing of migrants, returns, readmission to Turkey when Turkey is willing, if Turkey is willing to implement again the EU-Turkey deal. And concerning Melilla, well, this was a ruling from the European Court of Human Rights in a case where migrants wanted to force the border, the land border between Morocco and Melilla, Spain, and well, the court said that Spain had no obligations to offer them access to an asylum procedure. So that's what I understand, and that's it. That's it, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Let me first say that we have seen during the last few months concerns and questions raised in the JHA Council. We have seen an investigation initiated by Olaf. We have seen also an investigation by the European Ombudsman. We have seen this working group in Parliament being established. And I should say that I think it's very dangerous to this kind of focus on how we can help Frontex to functioning better, to interpret that as a hostile or action towards Frontex. I think that's very dangerous. Of course, I support Frontex. It's a part of my everyday job to do that. And to do that, we must make sure that, of course, Frontex can answer questions, can quicker than now clarify any alleged infringement of fundamental rights, of course, comply with their own regulation, and of course, being able to be transparent for the citizens, for Parliament, for member states. This is about to care about Frontex.
The next is Sira Rego for 1 minute.
Gracias. ¿Tiene sensación de impunidad, señor Leggeri? Le pregunto esto porque solo así se puede entender que usted haya venido en varias ocasiones a este Parlamento y nos haya mentido. Hoy nos está diciendo la verdad, nos va a decir la verdad. Mire, yo soy de las personas que están convencidas que Frontex está fuera de control y que usted está fuera de control. Y si me contesta con la verdad a la pregunta que le voy a hacer, quedará acreditado. Usted debía, por obligación, contratar a 40 monitores para garantizar los derechos fundamentales y no lo ha hecho, pero sí ha tenido tiempo de contratar a 300 agentes. A mí me gustaría saber a qué se debe esta arbitrariedad. Me gustaría saber quién controla, por tanto, la materia de derechos fundamentales. ¿Dónde están estos agentes? ¿Qué están haciendo? ¿Van armados, señor Leggeri, estos agentes? Señora Johansson, es conmovedor su relato y su preocupación, pero en la Comisión tiene a 2 personas en ese Consejo de Administración y usted es la máxima responsable política. A mí me gustaría saber qué tipo de control tiene usted, qué tipo de vínculo político tiene usted sobre Frontex y sobre el señor Leggeri. Gracias.
Thank you. Mr. Leggeri, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On the recruitment of the 40 fundamental rights monitors, there is a framework. There was a framework to be put in place, the fundamental rights framework of the agency, with different management board decisions to be adopted before we could start the recruitment of the fundamental rights officer, and then the deputy fundamental rights officer, and then to kick off the 40 monitors recruitment. The establishment of the legal framework for the fundamental rights in general in the agency for the new, let's say, human resources in fundamental rights has been delayed by long discussions. I can simply say that from a legal perspective, the question from my perspective was how to reconciliate the fact that the fundamental rights officer is independent. So I'm answering your question. Who is in charge of the fundamental rights monitors? This is the fundamental rights officer, and he or she is independent. So that's clear. But then we have the financial regulations and, let's say, regulatory framework of the agency, and all my questions were about the way we establish a system where I think it's good for the agency and for the fundamental rights in general, that the executive director and the fundamental rights officer can cooperate smoothly. The fundamental rights officer is independent, but we needed to fine-tune, for example, the accountability in financial matters. The fundamental rights officer is appointed by the management board. The executive director has no say, even not consulted or cannot express an opinion. So these are discussions that took place in the management board.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Yes, I have the political responsibility over Frontex, but not me nor any of my colleagues have the competence to issue any guidance or give any instructions to the executive director. The management responsibility for Frontex is fully on the executive director and on the management board. The Commission has 2 representatives in the management board, and I am responsible, of course, how they act. And to come back to what was just mentioned by the executive director with this deployment of the 40 fundamental rights monitors, they could and should have been in place already in December last year. And this is one of the issues that was raised in the letter I referred to earlier that my Director General sent on my behalf and also shared with Parliament, how the Commission's representatives have been acting to have these fundamental rights monitors in place earlier.
Thank you very much. Just to inform you all that the ECR group has informed us that neither of the members could be present today, so we can move already to the second round, and I'll give the floor to Lena Dupont for her question.
Thanks also for that, Madam Chair. I will just pick up the last point we had on the hiring of the fundamental rights monitoring persons. Mr. Leggeri, you just told us that there were long discussions that delayed the process of hiring these persons. Could you please specify a bit more with whom and about what these discussions were? And to the Commissioner, you just quote, if I may quote yourself, you just stated that the role of the Commission is to make sure that the agency can perform adequately and in best terms, and that you care for Frontex. I do still have problems of bringing this together with your first answer to my question, because as far as I know, the agency nor the working group asked for a judgment on that, but asked for legal guidance and clarity for those we deploy on the ground on behalf of the European Union. So can we expect guidance, at least in this regard, in the due time? Thanks.
Go ahead, Mr. Leggeri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The discussions were in the context of the preparation of draft management board decisions. According to the regulation, the executive director proposes draft management board decisions, and then they are adopted, they are discussed, and they are adopted or not, or amended by the management board. We had close discussions first with the services of the Commission, with DG Home, when it comes to staff regulation, when it comes to, let's say, the regulatory framework of the agency, and the discussions were long on the independence and the middle management board decision on fundamental rights officer, and basically the systemic effect. That was my assessment, that the systemic effect was perhaps not perceived by some experts in the services. That if we have on the one hand an executive director that shall delegate a budget delegation, and on the top of that you have because this was the state of play of certain discussions, that the fundamental rights officer could not be held accountable by the executive director in budget management. This came later, that after discussions this was accepted, but also in a context where the executive director cannot participate in the recruitment, or can even not be asked by the management board any kind of opinion. The assessment was that for the function of the executive director, I'm not talking about me, but the function, it creates a risk environment, and we had to have things right.
Thank you. I pass on the floor to you, Commissioner. I should have given you the floor, because in the second round, it's for the sake of balance, Commissioner would answer first, but I'll do that for the next member. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you. May I stress again, it's the exclusive competence of European Court of Justice to make the interpretation of EU law. But the Commission has been asked to give some guidance or interpretation of how we see the legal framework in this aspect. We have been asked by the Management Board and the Working Group, and this has been produced and has been sent to the Management Board and the Working Group, and I do hope they will make it public.
The next colleague to ask his question is Javier Morano Sanchez.
Gracias, Presidenta. Monsieur Leggeri, Madame la Commissaire, le groupe socialiste a toujours soutenu depuis sa création Frontex, mais nous devons veiller sur Frontex. Moi-même, j'étais rapporteur pour la première évaluation en 2008, et nous voulons que Frontex veille sur les droits humains. Donc ça a déjà été évoqué, donc je vais être très précis. Quand est-ce que les 40 observateurs des droits humains vont être opérationnels, et que pense faire l'agence dans la dimension du respect des droits fondamentaux au-delà de cet engagement des 40 experts? Deuxième chose, quels canaux pouvez-vous nous assurer dans le futur, pour que nous évitions d'apprendre tout ce qui se passe dans les opérations par la presse? Je pense qu'un canal fluide serait très important pour éviter qu'on arrive à des situations tendues. Et une question à la commissaire. Quand pense la Commission faire une évaluation du règlement de 2019 pour voir un peu qu'est-ce qui peut être amélioré et qu'est-ce qui a fonctionné et quels sont les résultats de Frontex depuis l'application du nouveau règlement? Merci.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Madam Commissioner.
Yes, thank you. We are already preparing for an evaluation of the EBCG regulation. We are intending to hire external contractors maybe the end of this year or early beginning of next year to support the process, and so have the main evaluation going on next year. So, and therefore we will also make a review of the standing course that will come also the year later. So I do not really see that there is a need to speed up this even more, because it's already prepared in preparation, and we will do the evaluation. And I think it's necessary. If we care about Frontex, we need to have transparency, we need to have evaluations, and we need to have a proper debate on how we could improve and address shortcomings that are being shown.
Thank you very much. Mr. Leggeri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The 40 monitors are in the process of being recruited. So right now, the fundamental rights officer at interim is hearing candidates, there are two procedures in parallel, one for AD post and one for AST post. The Fundamental Rights Officer ad interim told me that at the end of March or beginning of April, she will be able to offer jobs to successful candidates. She intends to recruit a first wave of 15 monitors, and then she will pick in the reserve list other successful candidates. In between, as I said, we are working with the Commission services to amend our establishment plan so that we have more AD posts, so that the Fundamental Rights Officer ad interim could pick more successful candidates from the AD reserve list, so that we could have more AD, if not all, but more AD posts in the 40 fundamental rights monitors pool. When it comes to additional measures beyond the monitors, well, first of all, we have the fundamental rights officer that will be recruited, normally appointed, I expect, by the management board in March. And we have the Deputy Fundamental Rights Officer that will be recruited by the Fundamental Rights Officer. The current Fundamental Rights Officer at the interim has committed to stay, or asked me if she could stay. I said yes, it's a good point, as a kind of bridging solution to support the newly appointed Fundamental Rights Officer, so that there would be a continuity in the management of the 40 monitors that will be recruited. And we have the Fundamental Rights Strategy that was adopted on the 14th of February by the Management Board, and we are working on the action plan to implement it. So these are in a nutshell. Plus, we have 10 staff in the headquarters.
Thank you. Mr. Tudorache now for 1 minute.
Thank you. Commissioner, I must admit I had another question prepared for you, but listening to today's discussions, there's another one that grows on me. The Commission is the guardian of the treaties, so somehow you must have some responsibility as to the interpretation and application of the laws. That's number one. Number two, out of the people in this room, you are politically accountable to us for the portfolio of Home Affairs, including for the work of this agency. So you have a political scrutiny over what the agency does. How are you applying that, apart from sending a letter on the 18th of December and saying that you have 2 people in the management board? And to Mr. Leggeri, boats with migrants have been an issue in the Mediterranean since 2014, at least. Regulation 656 has been around since 2014. You've been an executive director since January 2015. So why is it that only now we are discovering that there is an issue with interpretation of 656? And why hasn't you anticipated these sort of evolutions for the operations at sea earlier? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Johansson.
Thank you. As I said earlier, I have the political responsibility over Frontex because it's under my portfolio. Even though I don't have, it's an independent body that have its own responsibility and its own audit and are responsible for how they act. But I'm responsible for how the Commission acts in this. And that's why it's important that I and my services are working very close together with Frontex and have had several contacts, of course, bilaterally, and also how we act in the board to support and help Frontex, but also to be clear on what we expect from Frontex. And this has been, for example, to be able to comply with the regulation of what, for me, it's fundamental to do that. But also, of course, when to have a proper reporting system in place, to be able to clarify, to have transparency for this kind of alleged infringement that we just have been discussing. And yes, of course, we are in a situation, of course, where we could have an opinion on the legality, but it's not our role. I have to be clear about that again. So it's the court is the only one who have the final say when it comes to the interpretation. But we have presented our interpretation, and we have sent it to the management board and the working group yesterday.
Mr. Leggeri, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On the question why we discovered that 656/2014 regulation is complicated, I would like to point at the annual report that Frontex has to deliver every year. Usually it's in July. In 2018 and 2017 already in the conclusion, I pointed out that there were some difficulties and that in particular the practice of this regulation has shifted to a systematic disembarkation and, let's say, operational work under the umbrella of the search and rescue, which is usually correct in the central Med because of the distance between the North African coast and, let's say, Italy or Malta. But between Greece and Turkey, the distance is different, the geography is different, and notably the Greek government in March 2020 decided in the Security Council, National Security Council meeting chaired by the Prime Minister of Greece, they decided to make the optimal use of the provisions on interception, which means that in some cases the migrants' boats can be instructed to not to stay in the territorial waters or not to enter. So that's why there is now a momentum in operational terms because of geography, because political shift in Greece, if I may say. And it's not the first time that Frontex has pointed that there are some questions, and these reports were sent to the European Parliament, but also to other EU institutions, the Commission and the Council.
Thank you very much. Peter Kofod is next for 1 minute.
Tak for det, formand, og tak herr Leggeri og kommissær Johansson for at komme her i dag. Det bliver ofte en sådan lidt indforstået her i parlamentet, når vi taler om, hvad Frontex kan og må og ikke må. Så derfor vil jeg bare, fordi der er utrolig mange, der interesserer sig for vores grænser og beskyttelsen af dem, spørge ind til nogle ganske få ting. Først til kommissær Johansson. Der er mange, der ikke kan forstå, hvordan Frontex kan varetage beskyttelsen af de ydre grænser. Så jeg vil bare bede om kommissæren vil bede eller afkræfte, at Frontex må for eksempel trække både tilbage til, hvor de måtte komme fra, eller med magtanvendelse sørge for at sikre de ydre grænser. Kan kommissæren bede eller afkræfte, at det er en mulighed? Og når vi taler fundamentale rettigheder, så går jeg ud fra, at det handler om asylretten, hvis kommissæren også vil bekræfte det. Og så ganske kort til sidst til hr. Leggeri, så vil jeg gerne spørge, hvilke politiske tiltag skal der træffes, eller foranstaltninger skal der træffes, for at du er i stand til at sikre de ydre grænser bedre, end tilfældet er i dag? For det er sådan lidt et politisk ingenmandsland, det her. Så det håber jeg, at hr. Leggeri vil svare på. Tak.
Thank you. Over to you, Commissioner, for your reply.
Well, we have just sent from my services the interpretation of the regulation. As I said briefly earlier, under the Schengen's border code, member states are obliged to prevent illegal entry into the European Union. But an individual that apply for asylum has the right to have his application processed before an individual decision can be made on returns, for example.
Mr. Leggeri, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On the question whether Frontex should be allowed or is allowed to tow boats, I would say no. Frontex has never towed boats to the Turkish waters. The role of Frontex in this particular case in Greece, in Poseidon, is to contribute to border surveillance, to inform Hellenic Coast Guard about detected interceptions, and then Greece wants to be in front line. So that's very clear because they want, and member states have the primary role in border management. Then on the right to asylum, I must say that Frontex is an EU agency that has to enforce EU law, but we cannot make the law. You are the lawyers and the legislative body together with the Council. But what we need, to answer your question, what kind of political measures do we need? Well, for an operational agency, what we need is to have clear legislations regarding our field of activities, border management. Other areas such as asylum and migration are useful. So the Pact on Asylum and Migration will, of course, have an impact on border management, because when we see that when asylum system doesn't work, this has a negative impact on border management, and hopefully if asylum system works better, hopefully this will have a positive impact on border management.
Thank you. And now I give the floor remotely to our colleague Eric Marquardt.
Ja, vielen Dank. Das ist ja ganz interessant. Die Kommission ist nicht so richtig für Frontex zuständig. Frontex ist nicht so richtig für die Auslegung dessen zuständig, was die Mitgliedstaaten machen. Und die Mitgliedstaaten behaupten, dass eigentlich alles ganz gut läuft. Heute vor genau einem Jahr sind ja 2 bis 3 Menschen an der griechischen Grenze erschossen worden. Man weiß es nicht, eine Frau ist erschossen worden. Griechenland hat erst gesagt, das sei alles erlogen, diese Vorfälle gab es gar nicht. Dann kam raus, die Vorfälle gab es doch. Dann haben sie gesagt, oh, dann gab es die vielleicht, aber wir waren es nicht. Dann kam heraus, das war auch gelogen und inzwischen ermittelt die Staatsanwaltschaft. In diesem Zusammenhang wollte ich fragen, gibt es denn Hinweise darauf, dass an der griechischen Grenze menschenrechtswidriges Vorgehen stattfindet? An beide. Dann an Frau Johansson. Sie sagen ja richtigerweise, der Europäische Gerichtshof muss Recht auslegen. Aber warum bitten Sie den Europäischen Gerichtshof nicht mit einem Vertragsverletzungsverfahren Recht bezüglich Griechenland auszulegen? Und dann eine ganz konkrete Frage an Herrn Leggeri und Frau Johansson. Haben Sie Beweise, dass die vorhandenen Videos und Bilder von Pushbacks gefälscht sind? Gibt es da Beweise für, dass diese Bilder eben gefälscht sind? Bei Ihnen können Sie uns diese Beweise vorlegen. Eine Frage an Herrn Leggeri. Ist ein überfülltes Schlauchboot mit Motorproblem in Seenot? Sie haben ja auch im FAZ-Interview erklärt, dass Boote manchmal selbstständig umdrehen, weil die Menschen auf dem Wasser merken, dass sie gar keine Chance auf Asyl haben. Könnten Sie vielleicht auch sagen, wie die Anerkennungsquote von Menschen aus Afghanistan in Griechenland ist? Und meine letzte Frage. Sie sagen, man kooperiert nicht direkt mit der libyschen Küstenwache, aber gehen Sie davon aus, dass durch die Alarmierung der libyschen Seenotrettungsleitstelle es zu Menschenrechtsverletzungen kommt, oder können Sie das ausschließen, dass in der Folge der Alarmierung der libyschen Seenotrettungszone Menschenrechte verletzt werden?
Thank you. The floor is yours, Madam Commissioner, to reply.
Thank you. I think this question was a much broader question than that of the scrutiny of Frontex. But to be short about, I'm very concerned that we have repeated reports from reliable sources on illegal and sometimes violent pushbacks. And this is, of course, something that it needs also to take action and to consider the proper response. But this is maybe for another discussion than this one that we have right now with Frontex.
Mr. Leggeri?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to come back to the Libyan Coast Guard. The situation in the Central Med is as follows. When there is a search and rescue situation, and most of the time when we fly over the Central Med with our planes, Frontex can spot a situation of distress, which are really situations of distress at sea because of the distance between Libya and Italy or Tunisia and Malta, etc. And there is an international obligation, and we have to comply with that we have to inform the regional maritime rescue coordination centers. What we usually do at Frontex is that we inform both coordination center on the EU side, which means Italy and Malta, and when the incident is closer to the North African coast, we also inform, and we have to do so, we inform Tripoli and Tunis. And this is in line, it's even an obligation. In failing in doing this would also mean that the agency would be accountable, and even the management of the agency would be criminally liable for not assuring that people are safe. Because when there is no other options than the Libyan Coast Guard, yes, it's not the best, it's not optimal, but it's the only way in urgent matters to save those lives. Then what happens in Libya is a political issue, and if you ask me whether I find that the humanitarian situation in Libya is okay, I would say no, it is not okay in Libya.
Thank you very much. Now over to you, Cornelia Ernst. You are connected remotely.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank. Herr Leggeri, nochmal zurück zum Artikel 46 der Verordnung, wo es um Aussetzung oder Beendigung von Tätigkeiten geht. Es wurde ja schon von dem ungarischen Beispiel 2016 gesprochen, wo Sie aber von der FRA und dem Konsultationsforum aufgefordert sind, Ihre Tätigkeit einzustellen als Frontex in Ungarn. Aber Sie haben vergessen hinzuzufügen, dass es ja 5 Jahre dauerte, ein Gerichtsverfahren und 4.903 Menschen, die nach dem Gerichtsverfahren illegal zurückgeschoben wurden, um den Betrieb auszusetzen. Ich möchte von Ihnen wissen, haben Sie irgendwelche Konsequenzen daraus gezogen oder muss jetzt jedes Mal ein EuGH-Urteil herzu, um tatsächlich eine Aussetzung zu erzwingen? Und angesichts der zahlreichen Pushbacks in der Ägäis, Herr Leggeri, würde ich gerne wissen, was muss Ihrer Meinung nach passieren oder noch passieren, damit Frontex seinen Einsatz in der Ägäis aussetzt und beendet angesichts der zahlreichen Pushbacks? Und haben Sie jemals irgendeinen Anhaltspunkt für schwerwiegende, anhaltende Verstöße gegen Grundrechte oder Verpflichtungen des internationalen Schutzes in der Ägäis gesehen? Und an Frau Johansson hätte ich die Frage nochmal zur politischen Verantwortung. Sie haben mehrfach gesagt, Sie haben die politische Verantwortung für Frontex, es ist eine EU-Agentur. Was heißt das? Und sind Sie bereit, wenn grundlegende Verstöße gegen die Menschenrechte und die Grundrechte hier nachgewiesen werden können, dafür zu sorgen, dass politische und personelle Konsequenzen eingefordert werden im Verwaltungsrat, wo Sie vertreten sind?
Thank you. Over to you, Commissioner. And since you needed to leave earlier, if you'd like to immediately make your concluding remarks, you can do that now. Up to you.
Thank you. First, I expect, of course, Frontex not to infringe any fundamental rights. But I think it's also important that when there are situations that are being discussed or when there are allegations, it's important to immediately investigate and to clarify. And if any wrongdoings is being found, of course, to respond to that. And I do think I share this with the Executive Director that this is necessary. To also say my concluding remarks, because I'm very short of time, I must say that we need a first-class agency, as I said. We really need Frontex to help member states to protect our external borders and to protect our values and to help managing migration and to reduce the security risks for the European Union. That needs also a first-class governance and management. That needs a good regulation. That needs funding. But it also needs trust. And that's why it's important with transparency. That's why it's important to be open and welcoming a political and democratic debate about how Frontex is doing their tasks. So I think this is important. And I think it's very important that any shortcomings should not be thrown under the carpet or put a blind eye to. Any shortcomings should, of course, be addressed immediately and lessons should be learned. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner, for your time. I pass the floor to you, Mr. Leggeri, and you can also deliver your concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On the use of Article 46 of the regulation. In Hungary, there was a discussion, and at that time it was even in 2016-17, indeed, the agency was in touch with the Commission, which was the previous one, in order to know if there was an infringement or not. That means that I reduced the operational footprint in Hungary in order to keep a presence, because I think that this is the system we have to develop, that we have an escalation. Maybe we should map this in a standard operating procedure and communicate better what are the warnings. But the suspension was only possible, in my views, because there was, by design, a legal issue when the Court of Justice says And Commissioner said the Court of Justice says what is the law. So the Court of Justice said this is not correct in the Hungarian law. So then by design, even with goodwill, it's impossible to comply with the rules if you are in a country that doesn't comply with the EU standards. Concerning Greece, I think that in the Aegean Sea, there is a complex situation. This was highlighted also in the report that will be officially presented and discussed tomorrow in the Management Board. I think that for the first time we had a situation where irregular migration flows were not the result of criminal activities, but were also to be seen in the context of geopolitical and political use of the migration flows, and this was claimed by the third country concerned officially, so I'm not inventing. So that's creating a lot of operational stress under everybody in an area where there are also military competition between one member state and a non-EU member state, and disputes about the maritime borders. So this makes a very specific environment. Coming now to my concluding remarks, I would like to repeat that I'm personally fully committed to cooperate with the Scrutiny Group. The agency, as an agency, is fully committed to cooperate with you, members of the Parliament, with any investigating bodies. I fully understand that, as Commissioner Johansson said, we need to have a first-class agency because it's an exceptional mandate in terms of nature and size of the resources allocated to the agency. So whatever we can do better, whatever we can learn better will be welcome. I think that we have already processes in place. I said the fundamental rights framework is now being implemented. We have an inspection and control office which is developing its scrutiny on operational matters, because so far it was focused on administrative issues to handle events that happen in an office but not on the ground. So that's linked to the supervisory mechanism, the use of force, so that's very important. So we are transforming the agency into a European law enforcement actor, a kind of police, and the fact that the Standing Corps wears a uniform, is allowed to carry weapons and to use force under the national command of the member states is for the first time in the history of the European Union. But we also have to recognize that this is a very difficult ecosystem, if I may say, because we have the EU institutions, we have the agency with its own accountability and responsibilities, and we have the member states. And within each side of the triangle, we have different status. So within the agency, we have the management board, we have the executive director who is accountable, we have the fundamental rights officer that is independent. So even this is a more and more complex environment. And we also have to make sure that in the member states, all national forces are aligned, because in the integrated border management, we have more than 60 forces. So there is a need to communicate more, and I'm ready to reach out to all of them and also to cooperate with you, members of the Parliament. And if you can help reaching out to the other entities, this would be extremely helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Normally I would be really concluding, but Tineke, do you want to say something? 30 seconds?
Very, very brief.
Your group has already been given all the time, but go ahead.
Thanks a lot for all the answers. I think it's important that we also need to look into the different responsibilities, so also outside of the management board, to the role and responsibilities of the member states and of the Commission. It's good that Mr. Leggeri says that our recommendations are welcome. I would like to reiterate that they come from an institution to which Frontex is accountable, so that they are really to be implemented. We will talk with a lot of more actors, and of course in the end of our investigation we will be happy to exchange our findings with you in order to get your...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, colleagues. This was the final point of our meeting today. Thank you for all your interventions and your questions. We stuck to time. Let's keep this as as a rule for all our meetings. We take note of your views, Mr. Leggeri and Commissioner Johansson. Of course, we will continue our work to establish all the facts related to allegations and retain the possibility, of course, to invite our guests at one or more of our forthcoming meetings. We will be in touch with the details about our next meeting as soon as these are finalised. We are working with the Secretariat and the administration of the Parliament, and we are aiming, of course, to have at least one more meeting before the Easter break. So thank you, everyone. That's all for today.